The blood-red sunset painted the dusty streets of Quartz Hill, California, with an ominous glow as Adelaide Franklin hurried toward the dusty Diamond Saloon, clutching a worn leather satchel that contained everything she had left in this world: a few dollars, her mother's silver locket, and documents that could change her fate forever, if only she could find someone to help her deliver them to Sacramento. It was 1878, and the western frontier was no place for a woman alone. Adelaide had learned this lesson repeatedly during the 2 years since her father's death had left her to manage their small homestead. At 22, she had endured drought, bandits, and the unwanted attentions of Silas Morgan, the cattle baron who owned half the county and wanted her land to complete his holdings. The saloon's batwing doors swung open as Adelaide approached, releasing a cacophony of piano music, drunken laughter, and the clinking of glasses. She hesitated at the entrance, knowing that respectable women didn't frequent such establishments, but desperation had a way of rewriting the rules of propriety. Taking a deep breath, Adelaide pushed through the doors. The raucous noise faltered momentarily as heads turned to assess the newcomer. She stood straight-backed in her simple blue dress, her honey-brown hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet, painfully aware of how out of place she appeared among the card players, drunkards, and painted ladies. "Well, look what the wind blew in," drawled a voice from the corner. Adelaide recognized Jed Harker, one of Morgan's hired guns. He sat with 4 other men, all wearing dusty clothes and gun belts slung low on their hips. The notorious Harker gang had been terrorizing the county for months, rustling cattle and robbing stage coaches with impunity, protected by Morgan's influence. "Miss Franklin," Harker continued, standing slowly and sauntering toward her. "Funny finding you here. Mr. Morgan's been mighty concerned about you, riding out all alone when there's so many dangers about." The other patrons studiously looked away, suddenly engrossed in their drinks. No one wanted trouble with the Harker gang. "I have business in town," Adelaide replied coolly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "It doesn't concern Mr. Morgan." Harker's weathered face split into an unpleasant smile. "Everything in this county concerns Mr. Morgan, especially pretty little things that refuse his generous offers." His companions had risen from their table now, spreading out to block any path to the door. The barkeeper had mysteriously disappeared, and even the piano player had stopped mid-tune. "You've been stubborn, Miss Franklin," Harker continued. "Mr. Morgan offered you fair price for that worthless patch of dirt, but you keep refusing. Makes a man wonder what you're holding out for." Adelaide fought to keep her voice steady. "That worthless patch of dirt is my home, Mr. Harker. Now, if you'll excuse me," as she attempted to step around him, Harker caught her arm in a painful grip. "Not so fast. Mr. Morgan instructed me to bring you to him for a private discussion. It's time you understood how things work in Quartz Hill." "Take your hands off me," Adelaide demanded, but her voice betrayed her fear as the outlaws closed in around her. The saloon doors suddenly swung open with such force they slammed against the walls. The room fell silent as a tall figure stood silhouetted against the dying sunlight. Dust swirled around polished boots as the stranger stepped forward, revealing a lean, hard-faced man with intense gray eyes beneath the brim of a black Stetson. He moved with the casual grace of a mountain lion, each step deliberate, one hand resting near the worn grip of a Colt revolver. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality: a dark shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers. A star-shaped scar marked his left cheek, disappearing into several days' worth of stubble. The stranger's gaze swept the room before settling on Adelaide and the men surrounding her. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of distant thunder. "She leaves with me." Harker's hand tightened on Adelaide's arm. "This ain't your business, stranger. The lady and I were just having a friendly conversation." "Didn't look friendly from where I'm standing," the stranger replied, "and I've never been good at minding my own business." Adelaide stared at the newcomer, confused and wary. She'd never seen him before, yet something about his confident stance gave her a flicker of hope. "Who the hell are you to interrupt private business in Quartz Hill?" Harker snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "Name's Ethan Zachary," the stranger replied calmly. "Now take your hands off the lady." The tension in the room stretched taut as a bowstring. The outlaws exchanged glances, silently calculating their odds against this lone gunman. "There's 5 of us and 1 of you," Harker said with a smirk. "Those odds don't favor you, Zachary." "I only need 1 bullet to kill the first man who draws," Ethan replied. "Any volunteers?" Adelaide watched the silent standoff, her heart pounding. She didn't know this man, didn't understand why he was intervening, but she sensed he represented her only chance of escape. "Mr. Morgan won't like this interference," Harker warned. "Mr. Morgan isn't here," Ethan countered, "and I'm not leaving without the lady." For several tense seconds, no one moved. Then Harker's eyes flickered, betraying his decision a moment before he went for his gun. The blast from Ethan's Colt was deafening in the enclosed space. Harker howled, clutching his right hand as his pistol clattered to the floor. Blood seeped between his fingers from a wound that had torn through his palm. "Jesus Christ!" one of the other outlaws exclaimed. "Next one goes between the eyes," Ethan said, his gun already trained on the next man. "Your choice, gentlemen." Adelaide wrenched free from Harker's loosened grip and backed toward Ethan, never taking her eyes off the outlaws. "This ain't over," Harker growled through clenched teeth. "It is for tonight," Ethan replied. He extended his left hand to Adelaide without looking away from the outlaws. "Miss." Adelaide hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused but warm as he guided her behind him. "We're leaving now," Ethan announced to the room. "Anyone follows us, they'll get worse than a shot hand." They backed toward the door, Ethan's gun remaining trained on the outlaws. When they reached the entrance, he instructed Adelaide in a low voice, "When we get outside, turn left and head for the livery stable. Don't run, walk steady." The night air was cool after the stifling atmosphere of the saloon. Adelaide walked beside Ethan, acutely aware of how their hands remained connected, of the warmth of his presence beside her in the gathering darkness. "Why did you help me?" she asked when they were halfway to the livery. "Questions later," he replied, his eyes constantly scanning the street. "Morgan's men will regroup fast once they get Harker bandaged up." The livery stable was dimly lit, the elderly stable master dozing on a stool by the entrance. He jerked awake as they approached. "Evening, Mr. Zachary," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Change of plans, Henry. Need my horse and the bay mare I left with you." While the stable master shuffled off to fetch the horses, Adelaide studied her rescuer in the lantern light. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under harsh sun. The scar on his cheek was an old one, puckered and white against his tanned skin. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. "You don't know me." Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I know enough about Silas Morgan and his methods. Seeing a woman cornered by his dogs told me all I needed to know. But why risk your life for a stranger?" Before he could answer, Henry returned leading 2 saddled horses, a powerful black gelding and a smaller bay mare. "You heading out tonight?" Henry asked, looking concerned. "Storm's coming in from the mountains." "Better a storm than Morgan's men," Ethan replied, handing the stable master several coins. "Much obliged, Henry." The old man pocketed the money and nodded. "Take care on the trail and keep an eye on that lady. Ain't safe for folks crossing Morgan these days." Ethan helped Adelaide mount the bay mare, then swung easily into his own saddle. "Stay close," he instructed as they rode out of the stable yard. Instead of taking the main street out of town, Ethan guided them through back alleys and narrow passages between buildings. The moon had risen, providing just enough light to navigate by. When they reached the outskirts of town, he urged his horse into a canter, and Adelaide followed suit. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and Quartz Hill. The thunderheads Henry had mentioned loomed larger now, occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. The air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Finally, Ethan slowed his pace and guided them off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwoods beside a shallow creek. We'll rest the horses here, he said, dismounting. Adelaide slid from her saddle, her legs stiff from the hard ride. Where are we going? Away from Morgan's territory, Ethan replied, leading the horses to the creek to drink. After that depends on where you need to be. I need to reach Sacramento, Adelaide said. I have documents that prove Morgan has been falsifying land deeds and bribing officials. If I can get them to the federal marshal there, that's a long ride north, Ethan interrupted, his expression thoughtful. And Morgan will have men watching all the main roads. I have to try. It's my only chance to save my land. She hesitated, then added, I understand if you don't want to get further involved. You've already done more than enough. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his face half shadowed in the moonlight. Morgan's men won't stop coming for you, and they'll be looking for 2 riders now. A cold drop of rain landed on Adelaide's cheek, followed by another. The storm was upon them. We need shelter, Ethan said, glancing at the darkening sky. There's an abandoned line shack about half a mile west. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry. As they remounted and rode toward the shack, the rain began to fall in earnest, quickly soaking through Adelaide's clothes. By the time they reached the dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky hillside, she was shivering uncontrollably. The shack was small, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rickety table, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. Ethan worked quickly, tending to the horses in a lean-to at the side of the structure before joining Adelaide inside. You're freezing, he observed, immediately kneeling by the fireplace. He arranged kindling and some larger pieces of wood from a small pile in the corner, then struck a match. The dry wood caught quickly, sending welcome warmth into the chilly space. Adelaide huddled near the growing flames, her arms wrapped around herself. Thank you, she said through chattering teeth, for everything. Ethan shrugged off his duster, which had kept him relatively dry, and draped it around her shoulders. You should change into something dry, he said, turning to rummage through his saddlebags. I have a spare shirt. It'll be too big, but it's better than pneumonia. He handed her a clean flannel shirt, then said, I'll check on the horses again while you change. When he returned, Adelaide had changed into his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. Her wet dress and petticoats were spread near the fire to dry. Wrapped in Ethan's duster, with her hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had in the saloon. The storms settled in for the night, Ethan reported, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. We'll need to stay put till morning. He produced a small bundle from his saddlebag and unwrapped it to reveal jerky, biscuits, and a flask. Not much of a dinner, but it's what I've got. Adelaide accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. As they ate in companionable silence, the fire's warmth slowly chased the chill from her bones. You never did tell me why you helped me, she said finally. Ethan took a sip from his flask before answering. Let's just say I have my own reasons for disliking Silas Morgan. He's hurt a lot of people, Adelaide said quietly. Yes, Ethan's voice hardened. He has. Something in his tone made Adelaide look up sharply. This is personal for you, isn't it? For a long moment, Ethan stared into the fire, his expression distant. Then he said, Morgan hired men to burn my family's ranch 3 years ago. My father died in the fire. I'm so sorry, Adelaide whispered. Morgan wanted our water rights, Ethan continued. When my father wouldn't sell, accidents started happening. Cattle turned up dead, fences got cut. Then the fire. He took another drink. I was in town that night. By the time I got back, the house was gone, so was Pa. What did you do? What could I do? I had no proof. The sheriff was in Morgan's pocket. I tried to rebuild, but without Pa. He shrugged. I sold what was left to a neighbor and moved on. But you came back, Adelaide observed. Ethan's gray eyes met hers. I've been tracking Morgan's operations for months, looking for a way to bring him down legally. I was in the saloon tonight because I'd heard rumors that Morgan was planning something big. And then I walked in. And then you walked in, he agreed, the hint of a smile touching his lips. These documents I'm carrying, Adelaide said, reaching for her satchel, they're copies of land deeds Morgan has falsified, along with records of bribes he's paid to local officials. My father was the county clerk before he died. He kept evidence of everything. Ethan's expression sharpened with interest. And Morgan knows you have these, Adelaide nodded. That's why he's been so determined to buy my land. He thinks all the evidence is hidden there. Is it? No, these are the only copies. That's why I have to reach Sacramento. Ethan was silent for a moment, considering. If what you have is solid evidence, it could be enough to finally bring Morgan down. It is, Adelaide assured him, but it's worthless if I can't get it to someone with the authority to act on it. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the shack's thin walls and thunder rolling across the hills. Inside, a new alliance was forming in the firelight, two people wounded by the same man, now united in their quest for justice. Get some rest, Ethan said eventually, nodding toward the cot. I'll take first watch. You don't have to stand guard, Adelaide protested. Surely no one would be following us in this storm. Morgan's men are persistent, Ethan replied grimly. I've learned not to underestimate them. Adelaide wanted to argue further but found herself stifling a yawn instead. The events of the day, the hard ride, and the warmth of the fire had conspired to drain her energy completely. Wake me in a few hours, she said, reluctantly moving toward the cot. You need rest too. Ethan nodded, though Adelaide suspected he had no intention of waking her. As she settled onto the narrow cot, still wrapped in his duster, she watched him through half-closed eyes. He sat with his back against the wall, his revolver within easy reach, his gaze fixed on the door. The last thing she remembered before drifting to sleep was the play of firelight across his scarred face and the strange feeling of safety his presence provided. Adelaide woke to pale sunlight filtering through the shack's single grimy window. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back: the confrontation in the saloon, the stranger's intervention, their escape in the storm. She sat up quickly, looking around the small space. Ethan wasn't inside, but she could hear movement outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, rain-washed morning. Her clothes had dried overnight, and she quickly changed back into her dress, folding Ethan's shirt neatly. When she stepped outside, she found him checking the horse's hooves for stones, his movements methodical and practiced. You didn't wake me, she accused gently. He glanced up, nodding a greeting. You needed the rest more than I did. Did you sleep at all? Enough. He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. We should get moving. I've been thinking about your situation. And, taking the direct route to Sacramento would be asking for trouble. Morgan will have men watching the roads. But I know another way, harder trail through the mountains, but safer from ambush. Adelaide considered this. How much longer would it take? 3, maybe 4 days instead of 2, but we'd be alive at the end of it. The prospect of spending several more days in Ethan's company wasn't unwelcome, Adelaide realized with some surprise. Despite his gruff manner, there was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't encountered in a long time. All right, she agreed. The mountain route it is. They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining biscuits, then saddled the horses and set off. The rain had transformed the landscape, bringing a vibrant green to the normally dusty terrain. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. As they rode, Adelaide found herself studying Ethan when he wasn't looking. In the daylight, she could see more clearly the toll his vendetta against Morgan had taken. Though he couldn't be much past 30, there was a hardness to him that spoke of difficult years. Yet occasionally, when he thought she wasn't watching, his expression would soften as he surveyed the wild beauty around them. By midday, they had left the main trails behind and were following a narrow path that wound up into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The going was slower, with the horses carefully picking their way over rocky terrain, but Ethan seemed to know the route well. How did you find this trail? Adelaide asked as they paused to rest the horses beside a small spring. Spent some time with a prospector after I left Quartz Hill, Ethan replied, refilling their canteens. Old man named Hank Wheeler. He knew every goat path and deer trail in these mountains. Is he the one who taught you to track Morgan? Ethan smiled slightly. No, that I learned from a Cherokee scout during the war. Hank taught me other things, how to read the mountains, where to find water, which plants can heal and which can kill. You've lived an interesting life, Mr. Zachary. Just Ethan, he corrected, and interesting isn't always good. As they continued their journey, the trail became steeper, switching back and forth up the mountainside. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they'd left behind. Quartz Hill was visible in the distance, a dusty collection of buildings nestled against the base of the hills. "We'll camp up ahead," Ethan said, pointing toward a cluster of pines on a small plateau. "There's good cover there and a stream nearby." The campsite proved to be a natural hollow surrounded by dense trees, invisible from below. While Adelaide gathered firewood, Ethan disappeared briefly, returning with 2 rabbits he had snared. "That's a useful skill," Adelaide commented as he expertly skinned and prepared the game. "Necessity," he replied with a shrug. "A man gets tired of jerky after a while." As dusk fell, they sat by the small fire, savoring the fresh meat, a welcome change from trail rations. The night air was cool but pleasant, filled with the sound of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. "Tell me about your home," Ethan said unexpectedly as they finished their meal. Adelaide looked up, surprised by his interest. "It's nothing grand, just a small homestead about 10 miles east of Quartz Hill. My father built it when I was a child after my mother died." "What do you raise?" "We have had a small herd of cattle, some chickens, a good vegetative garden." She smiled fondly at the memory. "My father always said our land had the sweetest water in the county. That's why Morgan wants it. The creek that runs through our property never runs dry, even in the worst drought." "And you've been running it alone since your father died," Adelaide nodded. "It hasn't been easy, but I hired a local boy to help with the heavier work. Jimmy Fletcher, he's only 16, but strong and reliable." "No husband?" Ethan asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "Forgive me." "That's not my business. It's all right," Adelaide assured him. "There was someone once, Andrew Collier. We were to be married last spring." Her voice softened with the memory. "He was killed in a stagecoach robbery 6 months ago." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "Thank you." Adelaide stared into the fire. "It was Morgan's men who robbed the stage. They were never brought to justice, of course." A muscle tightened in Ethan's jaw. "All the more reason to get your evidence to Sacramento." They fell silent for a while, each lost in private thoughts. Finally, Adelaide asked, "What will you do? After Morgan, I mean." Ethan seemed surprised by the question, as though he'd never considered a future beyond his vendetta. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been focused on Morgan for so long, I haven't thought much beyond that." "You could go home," Adelaide suggested. "Rebuild your ranch." "Home stopped being home when my father died." He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "What about you? Will you stay on your land if Morgan is brought down?" "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "It's all I have left of my family. I won't give it up." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We should get some rest. I'll take first watch tonight and no arguments," he added when Adelaide opened her mouth to protest. "You can take the second shift." Adelaide reluctantly agreed, settling into her bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. She lay awake, watching Ethan's silhouette against the starlit sky, wondering about the man who had risked his life for a stranger and the demons that drove him. When he finally woke her for her watch, the moon had risen high, bathing the mountainside in silver light. Ethan's hand was gentle on her shoulder, his voice low. "Your turn. Wake me at first light." Adelaide sat up, fully alert despite the late hour. "Sleep well," she whispered as Ethan settled into his own bedroll. To her surprise, he did seem to relax almost immediately, his breathing growing deep and even. Adelaide moved to sit on a fallen log with a clear view of the trail below, her father's old revolver resting in her lap. The night was peaceful, with only the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through the underbrush. As she kept vigil, Adelaide found her thoughts returning to Ethan. There was something compelling about him, not just his obvious physical strength or his skill with a gun, but a deeper quality of integrity that shone through his rough exterior. He was a man shaped by loss and hardened by pursuit of justice, yet capable of unexpected kindness. The hours passed slowly, marked by the moon's progress across the sky. Just before dawn, when the eastern horizon began to lighten with the promise of sunrise, Adelaide heard at the distant sound of horses moving up the trail below. She moved silently to Ethan's side, touching his shoulder lightly. He woke instantly, fully alert, his hand automatically reaching for his gun. "Riders," Adelaide whispered, "coming up the trail." Ethan listened for a moment, then nodded grimly. "4, maybe 5, he murmured. "Morgan's men, most likely, they're tracking us." They quickly doused the remains of their fire and saddled the horses, working with minimal noise. The riders were still some distance below, but sound carried in the mountains, and Ethan was taking no chances. "We need to move fast," he said as they mounted. "There's an old mining trail about 2 miles ahead that branches off to the north. It's rough going, but it might throw them off our trail." They set off at a cautious pace, mindful of the treacherous terrain in the pre-dawn light. The eastern sky had turned a pale rose by the time they reached the junction. Ethan had mentioned a nearly invisible track branching away from the main trail. "This way," Ethan said, guiding his horse onto the narrow path. They had traveled less than half a mile when the sound of gunfire erupted behind them. A bullet splintered bark from a tree just ahead of them. "They've spotted us," Adelaide exclaimed. "Ride," Ethan commanded, spurring his horse forward. They galloped along the rough trail, branches whipping past as they urged their mounts to greater speed. More shots rang out, but they were moving targets now, and the dense forest offered some protection. The trail suddenly opened onto a rocky ledge overlooking a steep ravine. Below, a river churned white through a boulder-strewn gorge. The path continued along the ledge, barely wide enough for a single horse. "Stay close to the wall," Ethan instructed, moving ahead to lead the way. Adelaide followed, keeping her eyes fixed on the narrow trail and trying not to look at the dizzying drop to her right. Her mare picked its way carefully, hooves clattering on loose stones. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the ledge. A shout rang out, followed by more gunfire. Most of the shots went wide, but one ricocheted off the rock face near Adelaide's head, showering her with stone fragments. "Keep moving," Ethan called back to her. "There's cover ahead." The ledge widened slightly as it curved around the face of the cliff. Just ahead, Adelaide could see where the trail descended into a stand of pines. If they could reach those trees, they'd have better protection from the bullets. Suddenly, Adelaide's mare stumbled on a loose stone, nearly losing its footing. The horse recovered quickly, but the momentary check in their pace allowed their pursuers to gain ground. "They're getting closer," Adelaide called to Ethan. He glanced back, then pulled his horse to a stop in a slightly wider section of the trail. "Keep going," he ordered her. "Get to the trees." "What are you doing?" Adelaide demanded, reining in beside him, creating a diversion. Ethan drew his rifle from its scabbard. "Go." Adelaide hesitated only briefly before urging her mare forward. Behind her, she heard Ethan's rifle crack 3 times in rapid succession. There were shouts of alarm from their pursuers, followed by the sound of sliding rock. When she reached the relative safety of the pine grove, Adelaide turned to look back. Ethan was galloping toward her, and behind him, the trail was empty. At her questioning look, he explained grimly, "Collapsed part of the ledge. That'll slow them down, but not stop them. We need to keep moving." They pressed on through the dense forest, following game trails and stream beds, doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail. By midday, they had seen no further sign of pursuit, but Ethan remained cautious, frequently stopping to listen and check their back trail. "Do you think we lost them?" Adelaide asked during one such pause. "For now," Ethan replied, "but they'll keep looking. Morgan doesn't give up easily." The terrain had grown increasingly rugged, with steep slopes and dense underbrush that made progress slow. By late afternoon, both horses and riders were showing signs of fatigue. "There's a place we can shelter for the night about an hour ahead," Ethan said, studying the position of the sun. "Old mining cabin. Not comfortable, but defensible." When they finally reached the cabin, Adelaide understood what Ethan meant. The structure was built directly against a cliff face, with only one entrance and small windows that could serve as gun ports if necessary. Time and weather had damaged the roof, but the stone walls remained solid. Inside, dust covered everything and spiderwebs draped from the rafters, but the cabin was dry and offered protection from the elements and prying eyes. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and rough-hewn bunks lined another. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Ethan said with a wry smile as he unsaddled the horses in the small attached lean-to. "It's perfect," Adelaide replied, meaning it. After a day of hard riding and the constant fear of pursuit, any shelter was welcome. They worked together to make the cabin habitable, sweeping out the worst of the dust and repairing a section of the roof with branches and canvas from Ethan's supplies. By the time darkness fell, they had a small fire going in the fireplace and a simple meal prepared. "How much farther to Sacramento?" Adelaide asked as they ate. "If we keep to the mountain routes, 2 more days," Ethan replied. "There's a settlement called Pine Creek about a day's ride from here. We can resupply there." "And then what? Once we reach Sacramento," Ethan considered for a moment. "The federal marshal there is a man named Robert Hollister. I've heard he's honest, one of the few who won't take Morgan's bribes. If your evidence is as solid as you say, he should be able to act on it. And Morgan will finally face justice," Adelaide said, a note of fierce satisfaction in her voice. "Yes," Ethan agreed, but something in his tone made Adelaide look at him more closely. "You don't sound convinced." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Men like Morgan have a way of slipping through the cracks of justice. Money buys influence, and influence protects the guilty. You think the evidence won't be enough? I think we need to be prepared for disappointment," Ethan said carefully. "Even if Hollister acts on your documents, legal proceedings take time, and during that time, Morgan will still be free to cause trouble." Adelaide was silent for a moment, digesting this unwelcome but realistic assessment. "Then we'll just have to make sure the evidence is overwhelming," she said finally. "And be very careful until Morgan is safely behind bars." Ethan nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You're a remarkable woman, Adelaide Franklin. Most people would have given up and sold their land to Morgan long ago." "My father taught me that some things are worth fighting for," she replied simply. "He believed in justice even when it seemed impossible. He sounds like a good man." "He was." Adelaide smiled softly at the memory. "What about your father? What was he like?" Ethan's expression grew distant. "Stubborn as a mule, honest to a fault, worked from sunrise to sunset every day of his life." His voice softened. "He taught me everything I know about horses, cattle, and standing your ground when it matters." "He would be proud of you," Adelaide said gently. "Fighting for justice the way you are." Ethan looked away. Maybe he'd say, "I should have moved on instead of chasing vengeance for 3 years." "It's not vengeance," Adelaide countered. "It's justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" Ethan asked, meeting her gaze. "Sometimes I'm not so sure." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's rough walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the pines and rattling the cabin's single door. "We should set watches again tonight," Ethan said, changing the subject. "I'll take first." "No," Adelaide interrupted firmly. "You've barely slept in 2 days. I'll take the first watch this time." To her surprise, Ethan didn't argue. "Wake me in 4 hours," he said, settling onto one of the bunks with his rifle close at hand. Adelaide moved to sit by the window, where she could see the approach to the cabin while staying hidden from outside view. The night was clear, stars blazing in the mountain sky with an intensity rarely seen in lower elevations. As she kept watch, Adelaide found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought Ethan Zachary into her life. 2 days ago, she had been alone in her fight against Silas Morgan. Now she had an ally who understood her struggle in a way no one else could, because it was his struggle too. More than that, she realized with a small shock. She was beginning to care for this quiet, determined man. His strength and integrity called to something deep within her, awakening feelings she had thought died with Andrew. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. Adelaide had learned the hard way how quickly happiness could be snatched away on the frontier. Allowing herself to care for Ethan meant risking that pain again. And yet, watching him sleep in the firelight, his face finally relaxed in repose, she knew it might already be too late to guard her heart. The night passed without incident. When Adelaide woke Ethan for his watch, their hands touched briefly in the darkness, sending an unexpected warmth through her veins. If Ethan noticed her quick intake of breath, he gave no sign. Dawn brought clear skies and the decision to move on quickly. They ate a cold breakfast, not wanting to risk a fire that might be spotted by pursuers, then saddled the horses and continued their journey. The trail grew steeper as they ascended toward a high pass that would take them over the mountains and down toward Pine Creek. By mid-morning, they had climbed above the tree line where the air was thin and crisp, scented with snow from the highest peaks. "It's beautiful," Adelaide said, pausing to look back at the vast panorama spread below them, forested slopes falling away to the distant valley, with the ribbon of a river winding through it. "Worth the climb," Ethan agreed, a rare smile softening his features. "My father used to say that mountains put things in perspective, makes a man's troubles seem smaller when he can see the world laid out like this." "Is that why you came to the mountains after he died?" "Partly," Ethan admitted. "Also because it was the last place Morgan's men would look for me. They prefer towns and taverns to places like this." They continued climbing toward the pass, the horses laboring in the thin air. Near the summit, Ethan suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Adelaide reined in beside him, immediately alert. "What is it?" Ethan pointed to a spot on the trail ahead where fresh hoofprints were visible in a patch of soft earth. "Someone's been through here recently, within the last day." Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Morgan's men could be, or hunters, prospectors. Ethan dismounted to examine the tracks more closely. 4 horses, heavily laden, moving fast. "Heading which way?" "Same direction we are," he remounted, his expression grim. "We'll proceed with caution. If it is Morgan's men, they might be setting up an ambush ahead." They crossed the pass with heightened vigilance, Ethan frequently stopping to check for signs of their mysterious predecessors. The trail began to descend on the other side, winding through scattered pines that grew more numerous as they lost elevation. By mid-afternoon, they had re-entered dense forest, the trail narrowing as it followed the course of a swift mountain stream. Here, the trees grew close together, limiting visibility and creating numerous potential hiding places for ambushers. Ethan led them off the main trail onto a faint deer path that paralleled it at a distance. Progress was slower, but the added caution seemed prudent given the unknown riders ahead. They had traveled this way for perhaps an hour when the sound of gunfire echoed through the forest, coming from somewhere ahead. Both riders immediately reined in, listening intently. "That wasn't meant for us," Ethan said after a moment. "Too far ahead." More shots rang out, followed by shouts that were too distant to distinguish words. Ethan and Adelaide exchanged concerned glances. "Wait here," Ethan instructed, dismounting and drawing his rifle. "I'll scout ahead." "Be careful," Adelaide said, fighting the urge to follow him. Ethan nodded and disappeared into the trees, moving silently in the direction of the disturbance. Adelaide waited anxiously, one hand on her revolver, watching both the path Ethan had taken and their back trail. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably less than 15 minutes, Ethan returned, his expression troubled. "Stagecoach robbery," he reported grimly. "The Pine Creek stage. 4 men attacked it about a mile ahead where the trail crosses the main road." "Morgan's men?" "Yes. I recognized 2 of them, part of the gang that was in the saloon." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They've killed the driver and guard. There were passengers too." Adelaide's heart sank. "Are they?" 2 men, a woman and a child. They're alive, but the outlaws have them captive." Ethan's eyes met hers. "It's a trap, Adelaide. They're using the passengers as bait." "For us?" Adelaide asked, though she already knew the answer. Ethan nodded. "They must have guessed we'd be heading for Pine Creek. They've positioned men to watch both approaches to the settlement." Adelaide felt a cold determination replace her initial fear. "We can't leave those people to die." "No," Ethan agreed. "We can't." "What's your plan?" Ethan considered for a moment. "We need to get closer, assess the situation properly, then we'll decide how to proceed." Leaving the horses secured in a small clearing, they moved forward on foot, using the dense forest cover to approach the ambush site undetected. When they were close enough to see what was happening, they crouched behind a fallen log to observe. The stagecoach had been stopped in a small clearing where the forest trail intersected with the wider road to Pine Creek. The bodies of the driver and guard lay sprawled beside the vehicle. 4 armed men, the same ones who had confronted Adelaide in the saloon, had positioned the surviving passengers in front of the coach. A middle-aged couple sat on the ground, the woman weeping quietly while her husband tried to comfort her. Next to them, a well-dressed younger man held a terrified child of perhaps 6 years in his arms. "The man with the scar is Vince Doyle," Ethan whispered. "Morgan's chief enforcer since Harker got shot. The tall one is Reed Franklin, no relation to you, I presume. The others I don't know by name, but they ride with Morgan's outfit." Adelaide studied the scene with growing horror and anger. "They're using those people as shields. Yes, and they'll kill them without hesitation if it serves their purpose." "We need to draw them away from the passengers," Adelaide said. Ethan nodded, his mind clearly working through possible strategies. "I have an idea," he said finally, "but it's risky and you won't like it. Tell me anyway." "I'll create a diversion, draw their fire, and lead them away from the clearing. When they follow me, you move in and get the passengers to safety." "That's suicide," Adelaide protested. "There are 4 of them." "I know these mountains better than they do," Ethan replied. "I can lose them in the forest and double back." "What if you can't? What if they catch you?" Ethan's expression was resolute. "Then you'll have to get to Sacramento on your own." "There has to be another way," Adelaide insisted. "If you have a better plan, I'm listening." Adelaide thought frantically, studying the layout of the clearing and the positions of the outlaws. "What if we create a diversion together, something that would draw them all away from the passengers? Such as fire," Adelaide suggested. "We could set the underbrush alight downwind from the clearing. They'd have to respond to that, move the horses at least." Ethan considered this, then shook his head. "Too unpredictable. We could end up trapping everyone, including ourselves." As they debated, the situation below them suddenly changed. Doyle, apparently growing impatient, grabbed the child from the younger man's arms and held a knife to the boy's throat. "I know you're out there, Zachary," he shouted. "You and the Franklin woman. Show yourselves now, or the kid dies first, then the others." Adelaide felt her blood run cold. Beside her, Ethan's expression hardened into something dangerous. "He's bluffing," Ethan whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. "We can't take that chance," Adelaide replied, her voice equally low. "Not with a child's life." Doyle pressed the knife closer to the boy's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. The child whimpered, and his father made a desperate move forward only to be knocked down by one of the other outlaws. "Last chance, Zachary," Doyle called. 10 seconds, then the boy dies." "Wait," Ethan shouted, standing up from their hiding place with his hands raised. "I'm coming out, don't hurt the child." "No," Adelaide hissed, grabbing his arm. "They'll kill you." "Better me than an innocent child," Ethan replied grimly. "Stay hidden, wait for your chance." Before she could stop him, he had moved out of the cover of the trees and into the clearing. "Here I am, Doyle," he called, hands still raised to show he wasn't holding a weapon. "Let the boy go." Doyle smiled unpleasantly, keeping the knife at the child's throat. "Where's the woman and the documents?" "She's not with me," Ethan replied evenly. "I left her miles back with the evidence. She's probably reached the federal marshal by now." Doyle's smile vanished. "You're lying." Ethan shrugged. "Believe what you want, but you've got me now. That should please Morgan. I'm the one who put a bullet in Harker's hand, after all." While Ethan kept Doyle's attention, Adelaide circled through the trees, moving closer to the stagecoach where the passengers were being held. She needed to be ready to act when the opportunity came if it came. "Search him," Doyle ordered one of his men, who moved forward and roughly patted Ethan down, removing his revolver and a knife from his boot. "He's clean," the man reported. "No saddlebags or documents." Doyle's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Where's your horse, Zachary?" "Hidden," Ethan replied, "in case I needed a quick escape." The outlaw leader studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded to his men. "Tie him up. We'll take him back to Morgan. He'll know how to make him talk." As two of the outlaws moved to secure Ethan, Doyle relaxed his grip on the child slightly. It was the opening Adelaide had been waiting for. From her position at the edge of the clearing, she fired her revolver into the air. "Federal marshals." She shouted in a deep voice, trying to sound like a man. "Drop your weapons. The clearing is surrounded." The sudden noise created the desired confusion. The outlaws looked around wildly, momentarily forgetting both Ethan and their hostages. In that instant of distraction, Ethan acted. He drove his elbow into the stomach of the nearest outlaw, simultaneously grabbing for the man's gun. Shots erupted from multiple directions as Adelaide fired again, deliberately missing but adding to the chaos. The passengers scattered, the father grabbing his son from Doyle's suddenly slack grip and running for the cover of the stagecoach. Ethan had secured a weapon and was exchanging fire with two of the outlaws, using the coach wheel as cover. Adelaide continued firing from her position at the edge of the clearing, forcing Doyle to dive behind a fallen log. "Run for the trees," Ethan shouted to the passengers. Straight ahead, the family needed no encouragement, racing toward Adelaide's position while Ethan provided covering fire. As they reached the tree line, Adelaide directed them deeper into the forest. "Keep going, there's a deer trail 50 yards ahead. Follow it east." With the passengers safely away from the immediate danger, Adelaide turned her attention back to the clearing. Ethan was pinned down behind the stagecoach, exchanging shots with Doyle and one remaining outlaw. The other two were down, one clearly dead, the other clutching a wounded leg. Adelaide took careful aim and fired at the outlaw flanking Ethan. Her shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. Doyle, suddenly finding himself outnumbered, broke cover and ran for the horses tethered nearby. "He's getting away," Adelaide called to Ethan. "Let him go," Ethan shouted back. "We need to get these people to safety." Reluctantly, Adelaide watched as Doyle mounted a horse and galloped away. The wounded outlaw had also managed to reach a horse and was following his leader, leaving their two fallen comrades behind. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded, Ethan emerged from behind the stagecoach, keeping his stolen pistol ready as he checked the downed outlaws. One was indeed dead, a bullet through his chest. The other had been hit in the head by a ricochet and was unconscious but still breathing. Adelaide rejoined Ethan in the clearing. "The passengers are safe for now, hiding in the forest." Ethan nodded, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. "We need to move quickly. Doyle will ride straight for Morgan, and they'll be back with reinforcements." "What about him?" Adelaide asked, nodding toward the unconscious outlaw. "We'll take him with us to Pine Creek," Ethan decided. "He can stand trial for murder and robbery." They worked quickly, retrieving their horses and returning to the clearing. The passengers emerged cautiously from their hiding place when Adelaide called to them. The father carried his son, who appeared unhurt despite the small cut on his neck. The mother was weeping quietly, while the well-dressed man looked shell-shocked. "Thank you," the father said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You saved our lives." "We need to keep moving," Ethan replied, not unkindly. "It's not safe here." They buried the driver and guard in shallow graves beside the road, marking the spots with crude crosses made from branches. The dead outlaw they left for his companions to deal with. The wounded man they secured across the back of a horse from the stage team. With Ethan leading and Adelaide bringing up the rear, the small group set off toward Pine Creek, now only a few hours' journey away. The passengers traveled on foot, the father carrying his exhausted son, while their luggage remained with the abandoned stagecoach. "Will they come after us?" the well-dressed man asked nervously as they walked. "Almost certainly," Ethan replied honestly. "But we'll reach Pine Creek before they can organize a large enough force to threaten us there." The settlement came into view just as the sun was beginning to set a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lanterns were being lit in windows, creating a welcoming glow in the gathering dusk. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from buildings to stare at the bedraggled group, especially the unconscious outlaw slung across the horse. The town sheriff, a grizzled man named Jenkins, hurried to meet them, hand on his holstered revolver. "What's all this?" he demanded, taking in their appearance and the frightened passengers. Ethan quickly explained what had happened, identifying himself only as a traveler who had witnessed the stagecoach robbery. Adelaide remained silent, staying slightly behind the others. They had agreed it would be safer if her identity remained secret while in Pine Creek, which might harbor Morgan's sympathizers. Sheriff Jenkins listened to the account with growing concern. "Morgan's men, you say, operating this far from Quartz Hill?" He shook his head. "This is getting out of hand." "I'll telegraph the county sheriff right away." "The passengers need food and lodging," Ethan pointed out, "and we need to secure the prisoner." Jenkins nodded. "The hotel can take care of the passengers. The outlaw can cool his heels in my jail until he's well enough to stand trial." While the sheriff organized accommodations for the passengers, Ethan and Adelaide slipped away to the livery stable, where they arranged for their horses to be fed and rested. "We can't stay here long," Ethan said in a low voice when they were alone. "Doyle will have reached Morgan by now, and they'll be sending men to every settlement within riding distance." Adelaide nodded, her expression determined. "We'll rest for a few hours, resupply, and leave before dawn." They found a small boarding house at the edge of town that asked no questions and required no names. The elderly proprietor provided them with a simple but clean room with 2 narrow beds, a hot meal, and the luxury of bath water. Adelaide nearly wept at the sight of the steaming tub behind the privacy screen. After 3 days on the trail, she felt as though the mountain dust had become part of her skin. "I'll check the town while you bathe," Ethan said tactfully. "See what supplies we can get for the last leg of our journey." When he had gone, Adelaide sank gratefully into the hot water, allowing herself this brief moment of comfort before the dangers that still lay ahead. Sacramento was within reach now, just 1 more day's hard riding. If they could evade Morgan's men for that long, they might actually succeed in their mission. By the time Ethan returned, Adelaide had bathed, changed into clean clothes provided by the boarding house owner, and was combing out her damp hair by the small fireplace. Ethan paused in the doorway, momentarily caught off guard by the transformation. With the trail dust washed away, her honey-brown hair falling in waves around her shoulders, Adelaide looked younger and somehow more vulnerable than the determined woman who had ridden beside him through gunfire just hours earlier. "I've secured supplies," he said, regaining his composure. "And fresh horses. Ours are too tired for another hard ride." "What about Morgan's men?" Adelaide asked. "Any sign of them?" "Not yet. But the sheriff received a telegraph message just after we arrived, wanted posters for both of us, claiming we murdered the stagecoach driver and guard." Adelaide's eyes widened. "That's absurd. There were witnesses." "Morgan has friends in high places," Ethan reminded her grimly. "He's trying to discredit us before we can reach Sacramento with your evidence." "What did the sheriff do with the telegram?" "Luckily for us, he seems to believe our version of events. He showed me the message but said he'd wait to hear from the county sheriff before acting on it." Ethan set down the packages he'd brought. "Still, we can't count on his protection for long. We should leave before midnight." While Ethan took his turn bathing, Adelaide examined the supplies he had purchased: trail rations, ammunition, a new canteen, and warm clothing for the night ride ahead. Everything they would need to reach Sacramento. They ate a hearty meal provided by their hostess, then rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. At midnight, they slipped out through the back door of the boarding house and made their way to the livery stable where 2 fresh horses waited, already saddled. The town was quiet, most windows dark. Only the saloon showed signs of life, with piano music and occasional laughter drifting into the street. They mounted quickly and rode out, taking the northern road that would lead them toward Sacramento. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. They rode at a steady pace, saving the horses' strength for the long journey ahead. Neither spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them at their destination and what might be following behind. As dawn broke, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Pine Creek. The terrain had changed, the rugged mountains giving way to rolling foothills. They paused at a stream to water the horses and eat a quick breakfast. "We should reach Sacramento by nightfall if we maintain this pace," Ethan said, studying the position of the rising sun. "And then," Adelaide asked, the question that had been hovering between them finally spoken aloud. Ethan was silent for a moment. "Then you present your evidence to Marshal Hollister, and with any luck, Morgan faces justice at last." "I meant what happens to us afterward," Adelaide said quietly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that night in the saloon. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "For 3 years, bringing down Morgan has been my only purpose. I haven't thought much beyond that." "You could come back to Quartz Hill," Adelaide suggested. "Help me rebuild my homestead." The possibility hung in the air between them, a future neither had dared contemplate until now. Before Ethan could respond, however, the sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. "Riders," he said, instantly alert. "At least 6, coming fast." They quickly mounted and spurred their horses into the cover of a nearby grove of trees. From this position, they could see the trail behind them without being seen. Within minutes, a group of riders appeared, pushing their horses hard. Even at a distance, Adelaide recognized Doyle at their head. Behind him rode 8 men, all heavily armed. "Morgan's not taking any chances this time," Ethan muttered. "He sent his best men." They waited in tense silence until the riders had passed, then emerged from their hiding place. "They're heading straight for Sacramento," Adelaide observed with growing alarm. "They'll get there before us." Ethan's expression was grim. "Morgan must have guessed our destination. He's setting up another ambush, probably at every approach to the city." "What do we do?" Ethan considered their options. "We need to find another way, and one they won't be watching." "Is there one?" "Yes," Ethan said after a moment's thought. "The river. The American River flows right into Sacramento, if we can find a boat." They altered their course, heading northeast toward the American River. By midday, they had reached its banks, a broad, swift-flowing waterway that would indeed carry them directly to Sacramento. Fortune favored them in the form of a small fishing settlement where a few cabins clustered near the river's edge. An elderly fisherman was mending nets outside the largest cabin. "Excuse me," Adelaide called as they approached. "We need to reach Sacramento urgently." "Is there anyone who might lend or sell us a boat?" The old man studied them with rheumy eyes. "Might be. What's your hurry?" Ethan stepped forward. "We have important business with the federal marshal. There are men trying to stop us, dangerous men." The fisherman's expression sharpened with interest. "You in some kind of trouble with the law?" "No," Adelaide replied firmly. "We're trying to uphold it. Please, we need your help." Something in her earnest tone must have convinced him, for the old man nodded slowly. "My son's got a flat-bottomed skiff he uses for running supplies downriver. He's away trading, but I reckon he wouldn't mind lending it for a good cause." "We can pay," Ethan offered, reaching for his money belt. "Keep your money," the fisherman said, waving away the offer. "Just tell me one thing, these men chasing you, they wouldn't happen to work for Silas Morgan, would they?" Adelaide exchanged a surprised glance with Ethan. "Yes, they do. Do you know him?" The old man spat disgustedly. "Morgan's men burned my other son's ranch last year when he refused to sell. Boy lost everything, had to move to Oregon to start over." His eyes hardened. "Any chance to spite Morgan is payment enough for me." With the fisherman's help, they prepared the skiff for the journey. It was a sturdy craft, designed for transporting goods rather than speed, but it would serve their purpose. They loaded their supplies and the precious documents, then bid farewell to their unexpected ally. "Good luck to you," the old man called as the current caught the boat and carried it away. "Give Morgan hell for me." The river journey was faster than traveling by horseback would have been, the swift current bearing them steadily toward Sacramento. Ethan handled the steering oar with practiced skill, keeping them in the deepest part of the channel. "You've done this before," Adelaide observed as she watched him navigate a particularly tricky section of rapids. Ethan nodded. "Worked a river barge for a while after the war. It's been a few years, but some skills you don't forget." As the afternoon wore on, the river widened and slowed, the landscape around them changing from wilderness to occasional farms and settlements. By late afternoon, they could see smoke rising from the outskirts of Sacramento in the distance. "We'll need to be careful approaching the city," Ethan said. "Morgan's men will probably be watching the main docks." "What do you suggest?" "There's a smaller landing used by fishing boats about a mile downriver from the main harbor. We can put in there and make our way to the marshal's office on foot." The plan seemed sound, but as they rounded a bend in the river with the city now clearly visible ahead, Adelaide spotted something that made her heart sink. Riders moving along the riverbank, paralleling their course. "Ethan," she said urgently, pointing. He saw them too, his expression hardening. "They must have spotted us from the bluffs. We need to move faster." They were caught in an impossible situation. The current, while steady, could not outpace horses galloping along the shoreline. And the riders were clearly heading to cut them off before they could reach the city. "We need to land now," Ethan decided, steering the skiff toward a small cove on the opposite shore from the riders. "We'll continue on foot through the woods. It'll slow them down at least." They beached the boat and quickly gathered their essential supplies, most importantly, Adelaide's satchel containing the evidence. The woods here were not dense, but they provided some cover as they moved rapidly toward the city, now less than 2 miles away. Behind them, they could hear shouts as the riders discovered their abandoned boat. Soon the sounds of pursuit echoed through the trees, men on horseback crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground quickly. "We can't outrun them," Adelaide said, breathless from their pace. Ethan stopped suddenly, his expression resolute. "No, we can't, not together." Adelaide's heart clenched with sudden fear. "What are you saying? You need to go on alone," Ethan said firmly. "Take the documents to Hollister. I'll create a diversion, lead them away from you." "No." Adelaide protested. "That's too dangerous. They'll kill you." "They have to catch me first," Ethan replied with grim determination. "I know what I'm doing, Adelaide. This is why I came with you, to make sure those documents reach the right hands." "I won't leave you," she insisted, her voice breaking. Ethan caught her shoulders, his eyes intense as they met hers. "You must. Everything we've risked will be for nothing if Morgan stops those documents from reaching Hollister." Adelaide knew he was right, but the thought of Ethan sacrificing himself for her mission was unbearable. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "Promise you'll find me afterward." Instead of answering, Ethan pulled her close and kissed her, a desperate, passionate kiss that spoke of all the unspoken feelings that had grown between them. When they parted, his eyes held both tenderness and determination. "Go," he said. "Follow the river. The marshal's office is on K Street near the government buildings. Don't stop for anyone until you reach Hollister." Adelaide clutched her satchel tighter, tears threatening to spill. "Ethan, go now," he urged, already turning away. "I'll find you when it's done." With a heavy heart, Adelaide continued toward the city while Ethan moved in a different direction, deliberately making noise to attract the attention of their pursuers. She heard him fire his pistol twice, followed by shouts as Morgan's men changed course to follow him. The ruse worked. The sounds of pursuit faded as the riders went after Ethan, leaving Adelaide to make her way unimpeded toward Sacramento. Guilt and fear warred within her as she hurried through the thinning woods toward the city outskirts, but she forced herself to focus on the mission. Ethan had given her this chance, she couldn't waste it. The sun was setting as Adelaide reached the first streets of Sacramento. The city was larger than she had imagined, with brick buildings, gaslit streets, and more people than she had seen in one place in years. Under different circumstances, she might have been overwhelmed, but her determination to reach Marshal Hollister drove her forward. She asked directions from a street vendor who pointed her toward the government district. As she hurried through the crowded streets, Adelaide couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice she thought she glimpsed familiar faces in the crowd, but when she looked again, they had vanished. The federal marshal's office was housed in a solid brick building with the United States flag flying above the entrance. Two deputies stood guard at the door, eyeing Adelaide suspiciously as she approached. "I need to see Marshal Hollister immediately," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's urgent. The marshal's busy," one deputy replied dismissively. "Come back tomorrow." "You don't understand," Adelaide insisted. "I have evidence of criminal activity by Silas Morgan of Quartz Hill. People have died to bring this information to the marshal." The deputies exchanged glances. "Morgan," the second one said, "the cattle baron?" "Yes, please, I've traveled for days to get here. Lives are at stake." The first deputy still looked skeptical, but his companion nodded. "Wait here," he said, disappearing inside the building. Adelaide stood anxiously on the steps, constantly scanning the street for signs of Morgan's men. The deputy returned a few minutes later. "The marshal will see you," he said, holding the door open. "This way." Adelaide followed him through a busy office where clerks and deputies worked at desks, finally reaching a door with Robert Hollister, federal marshal, painted on the frosted glass. The deputy knocked once, then ushered her inside. Marshal Hollister was a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He stood as Adelaide entered, studying her with keen blue eyes. "Miss Franklin, I presume?" he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. "My deputy says you have information about Silas Morgan." Adelaide sank gratefully into the chair, suddenly aware of her exhaustion after days of hard travel and fear. "Yes, sir. I have documents proving Morgan has been falsifying land deeds and bribing officials in Quartz Hill County. He's also responsible for multiple murders, including my father's." She opened her satchel and removed the carefully preserved papers, placing them on Hollister's desk. The marshal took them and began examining them methodically, his expression growing graver with each page. "These are serious allegations," he said finally, looking up at Adelaide. "But this evidence appears substantial. Where did you obtain these documents?" Adelaide explained her father's role as county clerk and how he had secretly copied evidence of Morgan's corruption before his death. She told Hollister about her journey from Quartz Hill, though she carefully omitted any mention of Ethan's name, referring to him only as a friend who helped me. "Morgan's men pursued us the entire way," she concluded. "They're in Sacramento now looking for me." Hollister nodded thoughtfully. "That confirms reports we've received about armed men entering the city today." He rose from his desk. "Miss Franklin, I believe you're in grave danger. I'll arrange for you to stay in a safe location while my deputies and I review these documents and prepare warrants. How long will that take?" Adelaide asked anxiously. "My friend who helped me is still out there, possibly in danger from Morgan's men." "I'll send deputies to search for him immediately," Hollister assured her. "As for the warrants, if everything here is as it appears, we should be able to move against Morgan within a day or two." A day or two. The words echoed in Adelaide's mind. So much could happen in that time. Ethan could be captured or worse. Morgan could escape justice if word reached him of the investigation. "Marshal," she said urgently, "Morgan has friends in high positions. If he learns you're preparing to move against him, I understand your concern," Hollister interrupted, "but we must follow proper procedures." "Rest assured, only my most trusted deputies will be involved in this matter." A knock at the door interrupted them. One of the deputies entered, his expression troubled. "Marshal, there's a situation outside. Armed men are demanding to see you. They claim to be pursuing a fugitive." Hollister's face hardened. "Morgan's men," he said to Adelaide. "Stay here." He left the office with the deputy, closing the door firmly behind him. Adelaide moved to the window, which overlooked the street in front of the building. Below, she could see Doyle and 3 other men arguing with deputies on the steps. There was no sign of Ethan. The confrontation outside was growing heated. Doyle was gesturing angrily while Marshal Hollister stood with arms folded, clearly refusing whatever demands were being made. Finally, the outlaw leader backed down, retreating to where several more of Morgan's men waited with horses. They didn't leave, however. Instead, they positioned themselves across the street, watching the building. They were settling in to wait. Adelaide realized with a chill. They knew she was inside. Hollister returned to the office, his expression grim. They're claiming you and your companion murdered 2 men and stole official documents. They have warrants for your arrest, clearly falsified, but troublesome nonetheless. What happens now? Adelaide asked. I've ordered them to leave, but they refuse. They can't enter this building, it's federal property, but they can make it difficult for anyone to leave. He sighed heavily. I've sent for additional deputies and telegraphed the governor for support. In the meantime, you'll stay here where it's safe. Adelaide spent an anxious night in a small room at the back of the marshal's office, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her thoughts kept returning to Ethan. Had he escaped Morgan's men? Was he safe? Or had her mission cost him his life? Morning brought no answers but did bring activity. Deputies came and went, carrying telegrams and reports. Marshal Hollister appeared briefly to inform Adelaide that he was proceeding with the case against Morgan, but it would take time to coordinate with officials in Quartz Hill County. Morgan's influence runs deep, he explained. We need to be thorough to ensure he doesn't slip through our fingers. What about the men outside? Adelaide asked. Still there, but we have them outnumbered now. They won't try anything against a federal office. By midday, Adelaide was restless with worry and confinement. When a commotion arose in the outer office, she opened her door to see what was happening. Deputies were rushing toward the front entrance, hands on their weapons. What's going on? She asked a passing clerk. Someone's approaching under a white flag, the young man replied excitedly. One of Morgan's men, they think. Adelaide hurried to the window that overlooked the street. A lone rider was indeed approaching the marshal's office, a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel. With a shock of recognition, Adelaide saw it was Jed Harker, his right hand still bandaged from Ethan's shot in the saloon. Marshal Hollister met him on the steps. Their conversation was brief, with Harker handing over what appeared to be a letter before retreating to join Doyle and the others across the street. Hollister returned inside, his expression troubled as he entered Adelaide's room. It seems Morgan has raised the stakes, he said, holding out the letter. Adelaide read it with growing horror. Morgan was offering to trade Ethan's life for the documents Adelaide had delivered to the marshal. The letter stated that Ethan was being held at a warehouse on the riverfront and would be killed at sunset if the terms weren't met. Is this genuine? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe so, Hollister replied grimly. One of my deputies spotted a group of armed men taking a prisoner to the location mentioned early this morning. The description matches your friend. We have to help him, Adelaide exclaimed. We will, Hollister assured her, but not by giving in to Morgan's demands. I've sent for reinforcements from the army garrison outside the city. When they arrive, we'll move against the warehouse and free your friend. When will they get here? Late afternoon at the earliest. Adelaide's heart sank. That could be too late, the letter says sunset. It's a risk we have to take, Hollister said. I can't surrender evidence in a federal investigation, even to save a life, and I can't send my men against superior numbers without proper support. Adelaide understood his reasoning, but she couldn't accept it, not when Ethan's life hung in the balance. If Hollister wouldn't act in time, she would have to find another way. I need to rest, she said, feigning resignation. Please wake me when the reinforcements arrive. Hollister nodded sympathetically and left her alone. As soon as the door closed, Adelaide began planning. The marshal had been careful not to leave any weapons in the room, but she still had her wits and determination. The room had a window that opened onto an alley behind the building. It was small, but Adelaide thought she could squeeze through it. The drop to the ground was considerable, but not impossible. If she could get out without being seen, she might be able to reach the warehouse before sunset. But what then? She couldn't face Morgan's men alone. She needed help, someone who knew the city and wasn't afraid to stand against Morgan. An idea struck her. The old fisherman who had helped them on the river had mentioned his son being driven off his land by Morgan. Perhaps there were others in Sacramento with similar grievances, people who would welcome the chance to strike back at the man who had wronged them. Adelaide waited until the office grew quiet during the midday lull, then carefully opened her window. The alley below was empty. Using a strip torn from her petticoat, she secured her satchel across her body, then eased herself out the window, hanging by her fingertips before dropping the last few feet to the ground. The impact jarred her, but she managed to land without injury. Keeping to side streets and alleys, Adelaide made her way toward the riverfront district. Her first destination was the docks, where she hoped to find help among the working men who might have suffered under Morgan's influence. The docks were busy with stevedores loading and unloading boats, fishermen selling their catch, and merchants haggling over goods. Adelaide approached a group of older fishermen mending nets. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for anyone who might have had trouble with Silas Morgan of Quartz Hill." The men exchanged wary glances. "Why do you ask?" One finally responded. Adelaide decided honesty was her best approach. "Morgan's men have captured my friend who helped me bring evidence against him to the federal marshal. They're holding him at a warehouse and will kill him at sunset unless I return the evidence." Her words caused a stir among the fishermen. One man stood up, his weathered face creased with interest. "What kind of evidence?" "Documents proving Morgan has been falsifying land deeds and bribing officials, enough to send him to prison for years." The fishermen conferred quietly among themselves, then the spokesman turned back to Adelaide. "Lady, half the men on these docks have stories about Morgan. He's been squeezing out small operators for years, using his political connections to monopolize shipping contracts." "Then help me," Adelaide pleaded. "My friend risked everything to get this evidence to Sacramento. I can't let him die now. What exactly are you proposing?" Another fisherman asked skeptically. "I need to create a diversion, something that will draw Morgan's men away from the warehouse long enough for me to free my friend." The fishermen considered this, clearly weighing the risks against their desire to see Morgan brought down. Finally, the first man nodded. "I know some folks who might be interested in helping. Give us an hour to spread the word." Adelaide waited anxiously as the fishermen dispersed to contact others with grievances against Morgan. Gradually, men began to gather, not just fishermen, but dock workers, small merchants, and even a few ranch hands who had drifted into the city after losing their land to Morgan's expansion. By mid-afternoon, nearly 30 men had assembled in a warehouse near the docks. Adelaide explained the situation, and together they formulated a plan. It wasn't perfect, but with time running short, it was the best they could do. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Adelaide led her unlikely army toward the warehouse where Ethan was being held. It was a large building near the river, with Morgan's men posted as guards around the perimeter. The plan began with a diversion, a group of fishermen starting a fire in a nearby empty warehouse. As smoke billowed into the sky, shouts of "fire" echoed through the district. As expected, this drew the attention of several of Morgan's men who left their posts to investigate. With the guard force weakened, the second phase began. A group of dock workers approached from the opposite direction, creating a disturbance by staging a loud argument that escalated into a brawl. More of Morgan's men moved to disperse the fight, leaving only a few guards at the main entrance. Adelaide, accompanied by the most determined of her volunteers, circled around to the rear of the warehouse. A loading dock there was guarded by a single man who was quickly overwhelmed and restrained. Heart-pounding, Adelaide led her small group inside. The warehouse was dimly lit and filled with crates and barrels that provided good cover as they moved deeper into the building. From somewhere, ahead came the sound of voices. Peering around a stack of crates, Adelaide finally saw him, Ethan, bound to a chair in the center of an open area. His face was bruised and blood had dried on his shirt, but he was alive. 4 men guarded him, including Doyle, who was pacing impatiently. "Sunset's almost here," one of the guards said. "No sign of the woman or the marshal." "They'll come," Doyle replied confidently, "or we send Zachary back to them in pieces." Adelaide signaled to her companions, who spread out around the perimeter of the open space, using the crates for cover. When everyone was in position, she gave the final signal. One of the dock workers hurled a barrel into the open, creating a thunderous crash that drew the guards' attention. In that moment of distraction, Adelaide's group rushed forward from multiple directions. The element of surprise gave them the advantage. Two of the guards were quickly overwhelmed by the superior numbers. Doyle managed to draw his gun but was tackled from behind before he could fire. The fourth guard fled toward the front of the warehouse. Adelaide ran to Ethan, quickly cutting his bonds with a knife one of the fishermen had provided. "Can you walk?" she asked urgently. Ethan looked up at her with astonishment that quickly turned to determination. "Yes," he said, rising unsteadily to his feet, "but we need to hurry. The guard who ran will bring others." With Ethan supported between two of the stronger dock workers, they retreated the way they had come. Outside, the diversionary fire had spread to adjacent buildings, creating confusion throughout the district. Using this chaos as cover, they made their way back toward the relative safety of the docks. "We need to get back to Marshal Hollister," Adelaide explained as they moved through side streets. "He has army reinforcements coming. Once they arrive, Morgan's men will be arrested." "What about Morgan himself?" Ethan asked, his voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. "The marshal is preparing warrants based on the evidence I provided. Morgan will face justice soon enough." They had just reached the edge of the dock area when shouts behind them announced the pursuit. Doyle had escaped in the confusion and had rallied the remainder of Morgan's men. "Go," urged the fisherman who had organized the rescue. "We'll hold them off. Get your friend to safety." Adelaide wanted to protest, but Ethan was growing weaker and there was no time to argue. With a grateful nod to their allies, she and Ethan continued toward the government district, while their supporters formed a barricade to delay the pursuers. Night had fallen by the time they reached the vicinity of the marshal's office. The streets were largely deserted, most citizens having retreated indoors at the first sign of trouble near the docks. Adelaide supported Ethan as best she could, but his injuries were taking their toll and their progress was painfully slow. They were still a block away from the marshal's office when a figure stepped out of an alley ahead of them. Adelaide reached for her revolver, then froze as the streetlight illuminated the man's face. Silas Morgan himself stood before them, a pistol aimed steadily at Ethan's chest. "Miss Franklin," he said with cold courtesy, "Mr. Zachary, I've been looking forward to meeting you both properly." Adelaide shifted slightly, trying to shield Ethan with her body. "Your men failed, Morgan. The marshal has the evidence. It's over." Morgan's thin smile never reached his eyes. "Nothing is over until I say it is. Hollister may have your documents, but documents can be disputed, witnesses on the other hand." He cocked the hammer of his pistol. "Dead witnesses tell no tales. You won't get away with this," Ethan said, straightening despite his injuries. "Too many people know what you've done now." "Perhaps," Morgan conceded, "but I'll have the satisfaction of seeing you both die before I face whatever consequences may come." Adelaide tensed, preparing to draw her own weapon, though she knew Morgan would fire before she could aim. It was a desperate gamble, but their only chance. Before she could act, however, the sound of multiple guns being cocked echoed in the quiet street. From doorways and alleys on both sides, armed men emerged, not Morgan's outlaws, but deputies wearing federal badges. "Drop your weapon, Morgan," came Marshal Hollister's authoritative voice from behind them. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, land fraud, bribery of public officials, and multiple counts of murder." Morgan's face contorted with fury, but he was surrounded. After a moment's hesitation, he lowered his gun, allowing a deputy to take it from his hand. "This isn't over," he snarled as deputies moved to restrain him. "Yes, it is," Hollister replied firmly. He turned to Adelaide and Ethan. "Are you both all right?" "We've been searching for you since you disappeared, Miss Franklin." "I couldn't wait," Adelaide explained. "They were going to kill Ethan at sunset." Hollister nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your fishermen friends found us and explained your plan, quite resourceful if reckless." "We arrived in time to capture most of Morgan's men at the warehouse." "And the evidence?" Ethan asked weakly. "Safe," Hollister assured him, "and more than sufficient to ensure Morgan and his accomplices spend many years behind bars." He gestured to his deputies. "Get Mr. Zachary to a doctor. He needs immediate attention." As deputies supported Ethan toward a waiting wagon, Adelaide moved to follow, but Hollister gently held her back. "He'll be well cared for, I promise, and you look like you could use some rest yourself." Adelaide wanted to protest, but exhaustion was finally overtaking her. The past days of hard travel, fear, and the desperate rescue attempt had drained her last reserves of strength. She allowed herself to be escorted back to the marshal's office, where a deputy's wife was waiting to take her to a proper lodging house. "We'll need your formal statement tomorrow," Hollister said. "After that, you'll be free to return to Quartz Hill once we've ensured it's safe, of course." Adelaide nodded, too tired to speak. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Ethan, hoping that he was receiving the care he needed, and that his injuries weren't as severe as they had appeared. Morning brought news that Ethan was recovering at the city hospital. His injuries, while painful, were not life-threatening, mainly bruises and 2 cracked ribs from the beating he had received at the hands of Morgan's men. After giving her statement to Marshal Hollister, Adelaide went directly to the hospital. She found Ethan sitting up in bed, his torso wrapped in bandages but his eyes clear and alert. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like that," he said by way of greeting, though his expression betrayed his gladness at seeing her. "I could say the same to you," Adelaide replied, taking the chair beside his bed. "Leading Morgan's men away from me in the forest was equally reckless. Perhaps we're both stubborn fools," Ethan conceded with a small smile. Adelaide took his hand, her expression turning serious. "Hollister says Morgan will stand trial next month. With the evidence we provided and testimony from others he's wronged, there's no chance he'll escape justice this time." "Good," Ethan said simply. "It's been a long time coming." A comfortable silence fell between them, their hands still joined. Finally, Adelaide asked the question that had been on her mind since their desperate flight through the Sacramento streets. "What will you do now, Ethan? Now that it's over?" he considered for a long moment before answering. "I've been chasing vengeance for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to live for something else." His gray eyes met hers. "But I'd like to try." "Come back to Quartz Hill with me," Adelaide said softly. "Help me rebuild my homestead. We could make something good there together." Ethan's expression softened. "Are you sure that's what you want? A former bounty hunter with more scars than prospects? I'm sure about you," Adelaide replied. "Everything else we can figure out as we go." His answer was to draw her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise, the first moment of a future neither had dared to imagine until now. 1 month later, Adelaide stood on the porch of her homestead, watching as Ethan worked with the new herd of cattle they had purchased with funds from the sale of Morgan's seized assets, a small compensation authorized by the court for those who had suffered under his reign of terror. Silas Morgan had been convicted on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. His empire had been dismantled, his ill-gotten lands returned to their rightful owners or sold at fair prices. Quartz Hill was slowly healing from his long shadow. Jimmy Fletcher, the local boy who had helped Adelaide maintain the homestead during her absence, now worked alongside Ethan, learning the skills of ranching from a man who combined his father's traditional knowledge with innovations of his own. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan joined Adelaide on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "The north pasture fence is finished," he reported, "and Jimmy says the new well is producing even better than we hoped." Adelaide leaned into his embrace, content in a way she hadn't been since before her father's death. "This land is coming back to life," she observed. "So are we," Ethan replied softly. They had been married 2 weeks earlier in a simple ceremony attended by friends from Quartz Hill and allies from Sacramento, including Marshal Hollister, who had made the journey to wish them well. The small cabin that had once seemed lonely to Adelaide was now filled with warmth and purpose. "Any regrets?" she asked, turning to face him. Ethan shook his head, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "None. For the first time in years, I'm looking forward instead of back." "So am I," Adelaide agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As twilight settled over the homestead, they remained on the porch, planning their future in quiet conversation the spring planting, expanding the herd, perhaps adding a room to the cabin for the family they hoped to have someday. The journey that had begun in danger and desperation in a Quartz Hill saloon had led them here to peace, to justice, and to love stronger than either had dared to hope for in the wild and unforgiving West.